The sky above Ashcombe Manor had been the colour of old iron since dawn. By afternoon, it hung so low over the west field that the tenant said a man could reach up and touch it with a rake. The air smelled of hot stone and bruised grass, and something metal, like a coin held too long in a warm hand. Miss Vivienne Ashcombe stood at the drawing-room window, with her fingers pressed lightly against the cool glass, and watched the light change over the old oak at the top of the hill. She had watched that tree since she was a small girl. She knew every branch. She knew the way the leaves lifted when the wind came from the sea. She knew the way the trunk leaned a little to the south, as if listening for something no one else could hear. The 3 children of the parish had been sent up to the hill an hour before to gather early acorns for a school lesson. Vivienne could see them now, small figures in brown coats and a pale blue pinafore, running in a wide circle around the trunk. The tallest was Peter, the miller's son. The middle one was little Susanna Blake, whose mother had died in the winter. The smallest was a boy named Tom, no bigger than a lamb, with a laugh that carried down the hill on the wind. Vivienne watched them, and she felt the strange tightness in her chest that had been growing since the morning. She could not name it. She only knew that when the light went that particular grey, and when the birds stopped singing all at once, something old in her bones told her to move. "You are staring at the weather again," said a voice behind her. It was smooth and cold as river stone. Vivienne did not turn. She knew the voice. She had known it all her life. It belonged to her cousin, Miss Petra Ashcombe, who had come to live at the manor 3 summers ago after her own father had gambled his estate away, and who had never for a single day forgiven Vivienne for being the daughter of the elder brother. "There is a storm coming," Vivienne said. "There is always a storm coming, in your telling of it." Petra came forward and stood a careful 2 paces behind her, arranging her skirt so that the fine yellow silk caught the light. She smelled of lavender water and something sharper underneath, a thin scent like a needle. "Really, Vivienne, if you spent half the time on your embroidery that you spend on the sky, you might one day marry." Vivienne did not answer. Her eyes were on the children. Peter had climbed onto the lowest branch of the oak. Susanna was crouched at the base, sorting acorns into her apron. Tom was chasing a butterfly in a wide, wobbly circle. "His Grace will be here within the hour," Petra said. "I do hope you will not disgrace us. It is one thing to be plain. It is another to be silent as a fish. A duke expects wit at his table, not a woman staring out of windows." The words landed the way Petra's words always landed. They were sharp enough to draw a small bead of pain, but not so sharp that anyone watching would say they had been unkind. Vivienne had heard 100 sentences like it in her 23 years. She had a small private routine for them. She would count to 5 inside her own head, and by the count of 5, she would no longer feel the sting. 1, 2, 3. A drop of rain struck the windowpane, and it was as big as a shilling. 4, 5. She turned from the window. "I am going up the hill," she said quietly. Petra laughed. "In this, you will ruin your gown. The children are up there. The children have legs. Vivienne, they will run home when the rain comes. Do sit down. His Grace's carriage may be seen from this very window in a matter of minutes, and I will not have you arriving at the front step looking like a drowned kitchen maid." But Vivienne was already at the door. Her hand was on the handle. She could not have said what made her move. It was not thought. It was the tightness in her chest, and the colour of the sky, and the way the birds had gone quiet, and the way the old oak on the hill looked as if it were holding its breath. "Vivienne," Petra said sharply, "if you leave this room, do not expect me to explain your absence to the Duke." "Then do not," Vivienne said, and she was out. The hall was cool and dim. The stone floor bit through the thin soles of her house slippers. She did not stop to change. She caught up her shawl from the peg by the door, and she pushed the great oak door open with both hands, and she stepped out into the strange yellow light of the afternoon. The air outside was heavier than she had expected. It pressed against her face like a warm cloth. The smell of the coming storm was everywhere now, thick and green and mineral. And beneath it there was the deeper smell of the old drive, of gravel and horse and the roses at the gate. Vivienne pulled her shawl tighter and began to walk, and then to run. The drive climbed for 100 yards through the low garden, and then it turned into a footpath that wound up the west field toward the top of the hill. The grass on either side was tall enough to brush her hands. She could hear her own breath, and the soft thump of her slippers on the packed earth and, far off, the low warning growl of thunder over the sea. She looked up at the tree as she climbed. It was one of the great oaks of the county, older than the manor itself. Men said it had been standing when the first Ashcombe rode down from the north and named the valley. Its trunk was as thick as 3 barrels laid together. Its top branches were higher than the chimneys of the house. Vivienne had climbed it as a girl. Her father had lifted her into its lowest fork and told her the tree was a lord in its own right, and that it would outlast them all. She was 3/4 of the way up the hill when she heard the sound of hooves on the road behind her. She did not turn. She could not spare the second. She could see the children now, close enough to shout to. Peter was still up on the branch. Susanna had stood up with her apron full of acorns. Tom, small Tom, was standing right at the base of the trunk, both his little hands pressed against the bark, looking up at Peter and laughing. Peter, Vivienne called, and her voice was thinner than she had meant it to be. The wind took half of it away. Peter, come down. Come down at once. Peter turned. He saw her. He waved. The first true crack of thunder rolled across the sky, and it was not far off anymore. It was overhead. Vivienne felt it in the soles of her feet. She began to run in earnest now, hitching up her skirt with one hand, and the shawl fell from her shoulder and dragged along the wet grass behind her. Peter, come down. Susanna, take Tom, come to me. Susanna's face was small and white when she turned. She heard the note in Vivienne's voice. Susanna was a clever child. She dropped the corner of her apron, and the acorns spilled out onto the grass, and she reached for Tom's hand. But Tom was still laughing, still watching Peter, still with both palms pressed to the great bark of the oak. Peter began to climb down. He was quick. He knew the branches. Vivienne was still 40 yards away, and running. The wind stopped. That was the thing Vivienne would remember for the rest of her life. The wind, which had been pulling at her shawl and her hair, stopped all at once, as if some great door had been shut. The tall grass on the hill stood perfectly still. The birds, which had gone quiet an hour ago, gave no sound at all. Even her own breath sounded loud to her. She knew, in that stopped moment, what was going to happen. She did not think. Her body took over. She ran the last 30 yards faster than she had run in her life. She reached Susanna first. She caught the child under the arm and pulled her sideways, hard, out from the shadow of the tree. Susanna cried out. Vivienne did not let go. She reached with her other hand and closed her fingers around Tom's small wrist, and she pulled him too, pulled both of them, dragging them stumbling and half falling across the wet grass. Peter dropped from the low branch. He landed on his feet. Vivienne caught his collar in her fist without breaking stride. She had all 3 children now. She did not stop. She did not look back. She ran with them, sliding down the slope of the hill, away from the trunk, away from the great arms of the oak, and she counted seconds inside her head. 1, 2, 3. And on the count of 5, the world turned white. There was no sound at first. There was only the light, a blinding, blue-white light, so bright she saw it through her closed eyelids. And then the sound came, and it was not a sound at all. It was a great tearing, as if the sky itself had been ripped down the middle. She felt the ground shudder under her slippers. She felt Tom's small body twist against her side, and heard Susanna scream, and heard Peter shout something that might have been a word, or might have been nothing. She did not stop running. She did not stop until they were far down the slope of the hill, and only then did she throw herself to the ground and pull all 3 of them under her, curled around them like a hen over her chicks, her shawl thrown over the smallest one's head. Behind them, with a sound like the world breaking, the old oak fell. It did not fall in the way trees fall in stories. It came apart. The great trunk split from the crown down, and one whole side of it, a piece bigger than a cottage, tore free and crashed to the ground in a rain of leaves and splinters and smoking bark. The earth where Tom had been standing, where Susanna had been sorting acorns, where Peter had been climbing, disappeared under the weight of it. The sound rolled down the hill and out over the fields, and Vivienne felt it in her teeth. Then there was quiet, and then there was rain. It came down all at once, cold and heavy, and it hissed against the smoking wood behind them. Vivienne lay in the grass with the 3 children pressed against her body, and she could not have said, in that moment, whether she was breathing or not. She could feel each of them. Peter was shaking. Susanna was crying without sound, the way children cry when they are past making noise. Tom, the smallest, was silent, and for a terrible half a second she thought he was hurt, and then she felt his small fist close on a fold of her sleeve, and she nearly wept with the relief of it. "You are all here," she whispered. "You are all here. You are all here." She said it 3 times, as if by saying it she could make it true. It was then that she heard the boots. They came down the slope from the direction of the drive, fast, heavy on the wet earth. She turned her head and pushed her wet hair out of her eyes with her sleeve. A man was running toward them. He was tall. His coat was dark and expensive, and it flew open behind him as he ran. His hat was gone. His hair was black and already soaked. He had the kind of face that did not seem at first to be handsome, only to be entirely present, as though every other thing in the field had become a little less real when he arrived in it. He reached them and dropped to one knee in the grass. He was breathing hard. His eyes moved across the 4 of them, one by one, counting. "Are they hurt?" he said. His voice was quieter than she had expected. "Miss, are any of the children hurt?" She could not answer at first. Her throat was full of the storm. She sat up, slowly, and Susanna's face was pressed against her shoulder, and Tom would not let go of her sleeve. "I do not think so," Vivienne said. Her voice sounded far away. Peter, look at me. Are you hurt?" Peter, brave Peter, shook his head. His lower lip trembled. He was 10 years old, and he was trying very hard not to cry in front of the strange gentleman. The man let out a long, slow breath. Vivienne saw it as a small white cloud in the sudden chill of the rain. He put a hand very briefly on Peter's shoulder, and then he stood, and he lifted little Tom out of Vivienne's arms as easily as if the child had been made of paper. Tom did not protest. Tom, who had never in his short life been held by a stranger without complaint, tucked his wet head under the man's chin and closed his eyes. "Come," the man said. He held out his free hand to Vivienne. "You cannot sit in the rain." She looked at his hand. It was a broad hand, ungloved. The knuckles scraped a little from something, perhaps his run down the slope. She put her own hand into it, and he lifted her to her feet in one steady motion, as if she weighed nothing. Peter got up on his own. Susanna clung to Vivienne's skirt. Behind them the old oak lay in ruin. Steam rose from the split heart of it. The smell of burned wood mixed with the smell of the rain, sharp and sweet and terrible. And Vivienne knew, with a small cold shock, that she would smell that smell for the rest of her life and be back on this hill. They walked down the slope together, all 5 of them, the man carrying Tom, Vivienne holding Susanna by the hand. Peter walking close on her other side with his fists in his pockets. Halfway down the drive, they met 3 of the stable men running up, and behind them Petra, in her yellow silk, holding a shawl over her head against the rain, and picking her way in small, angry steps. Petra stopped when she saw them. She stopped when she saw the man carrying the child. Her face went through 3 expressions in quick order. First was fear, plain fear, at the sight of Vivienne wet and muddy and streaked with soot. Second was confusion, when she saw the children were safe. Third, and it settled into her face and stayed, was calculation. "Your Grace," she said, and dropped into a curtsy that was so deep it very nearly touched the wet gravel. "Your Grace, we did not. My cousin, I fear, has caused you great trouble. She is often impulsive. The man did not answer her. He walked past her as if she had not spoken. He carried Tom to the front step of the manor and set him gently down, and then he crouched to be at the child's height, and he said something low that Vivienne could not hear. Tom nodded. Tom, who had not said a word since his mother had died, whispered something back. Vivienne stopped on the drive. Petra had turned and was walking briskly beside her, still talking, but Vivienne could not hear the words. She was watching the man on the step with Tom. "Vivienne," Petra said, and pinched her elbow through the wet muslin. "Vivienne, do you hear me? That is His Grace, the Duke of Ravensmere. You have received him looking like a bog woman. You have carried on in front of him like a farm girl." "I do not know how I shall explain, Petra," Vivienne said. "Please be quiet." She said it softly. She said it without heat. But Petra, who had been pinching her elbow, let go as if she had touched a hot iron. Petra's face went white and then red, and she opened her mouth once and closed it again, and it was the first time in 3 summers that Vivienne had spoken to her in that voice. The Duke stood up from the step. He turned. His eyes, which were the colour of wet slate, found Vivienne's across the drive. "Miss Ashcombe," he said. He had not been introduced to her. He knew her name. "Will you come inside? Your slippers are ruined, and the child in your arms is cold." Vivienne looked down and saw that she was, somehow, still holding Susanna, and that Susanna was indeed shaking. She had not felt it. "Yes, Your Grace," she said. They went into the manor. The great hall was full of the smell of a fire lately lit, and of the wet stone of the outer walls. The Duke set Tom on a settle by the fire and wrapped him in a rug. Peter he seated on the stool beside it. Susanna, Vivienne kept in her own arms until the child fell asleep against her shoulder from the sheer exhaustion of terror. Only then did Vivienne set her down beside Tom. Petra hovered in the doorway. Petra rang for tea. Petra ordered a bath drawn. Petra managed the household. Petra was very good at managing when there was a duke to be impressed. Vivienne watched her out of the corner of her eye, and Vivienne understood quite calmly that her cousin was going to say something before the evening was over. Petra did not know how to see her humiliated in front of a great man and let it pass. The Duke did not sit. He stood by the fire with his hands behind his back. The rain had darkened his coat almost to black. His hair, drying now in the heat, was showing curl at the ends. He was, Vivienne saw now, perhaps 30 years old. He was not a young man, and he was not an old one. He had the settled quiet of a man who had already learned what mattered to him and what did not. "You went up the hill," he said. It was not a question. He was looking at her. "Yes, Your Grace. You saw the storm coming." "Yes, before I did," he said. "I was on the drive and I saw the sky and I turned my carriage back, and I ran up the last of the hill on foot when I heard the strike. I was 50 yards behind you." He paused. "You had already pulled them clear." "I do not know how I knew," Vivienne said. "I only knew that I did." He nodded once. He did not say anything else. He looked at the fire. Vivienne looked at the sleeping children on the settle. Petra came back into the room with a maid and a tea tray, and the room filled with the small polite noises of cups and spoons, and the sound of the rain still hammering at the windows. The doctor came within the hour. He examined all 3 children. There was not a scratch on any of them. Peter had a bruise the size of a penny on his elbow from the drop out of the tree. Susanna would sleep, the doctor said, and wake tomorrow and be a child again. Tom had inhaled a little smoke and had a small cough. Nothing that a warm bed and a good broth would not mend. "By any measure," the doctor said, drying his hands, "it is a miracle, ma'am. A tree that size, when it goes over, I have seen men killed by a branch 1/10 its weight." He looked at Vivienne with a strange, hesitant respect. "Miss Ashcombe, 5 seconds later and the parish would have 3 little graves to dig this week." 5 seconds. Vivienne felt the room tilt slightly, and she set her cup down carefully so that it should not rattle in the saucer. "Then I am very glad," she said, "that I was not 5 seconds later." The doctor went away. The children were carried up to guest rooms and warmed and fed. The parents were sent for. Word ran through the village faster than any messenger could carry it. By the time the rain slackened toward evening, half the parish was standing at the manor gate in wet shawls and caps, wanting only to see with their own eyes that the 3 children lived. Vivienne, changed at last into a dry gown of soft grey wool, came down the stair. She had thought the great hall would be empty. It was not. The Duke was still there. He stood at the tall window that looked over the drive, hands behind his back, watching the villagers at the gate. He did not turn as she came down. But she knew that he had heard her, because his shoulders shifted in the smallest way, as if he had been waiting. Petra was there too. Petra had changed as well, into pale rose, and had done her hair. Petra was seated on the sofa, arranging a little dish of sugared almonds and smiling in a way that showed both her dimples. "There you are, Vivienne," Petra said, and her voice was warm now, warm as a cake fresh from the oven. "I was just telling His Grace what a fright you gave us. My poor cousin. She has always been the sort to fly into a field at the first drop of rain, ever since she was a little girl. It is fortunate for the children that she happened to be looking out of the window at the correct moment, is it not?" "Your Grace?" Vivienne stopped at the foot of the stair with her hand on the banister. She heard the sentence. She counted, inside her head, to 5. The Duke turned from the window. He did not look at Petra. He looked at Vivienne. His face was perfectly still. "Fortunate," he said, "would not be the word I would choose." Petra's smile did not fall. Petra was too well trained for that. But her fingers tightened slightly on the little silver dish. "Oh, well, of course. I only meant," "You meant," the Duke said, still not looking at her, "that your cousin happened by accident to be near a window at the right moment. That is what you told me at the door. That is what you have been telling me for the past half hour." His voice did not rise. It only dropped a very little, the way a good blade drops into the hand. "It was not an accident, Miss Ashcombe. She saw the storm coming from a mile off. She knew what was going to happen before any of us. She went up that hill in her house slippers because no one else believed her. She pulled 3 children clear of a tree that would have crushed them, seconds before it fell. Do not, in front of me, describe that as luck." The great hall was silent. It was so silent that Vivienne could hear the rain sliding down the outside of the window and the low, soft crackle of the fire in the grate. Petra's mouth opened. Then it closed. She stood up very slowly, and her lovely rose skirt whispered against the sofa, and her eyes were bright and hard. "Your Grace," she said. "I am sure I never meant, I am sure you did," he said. He turned his eyes on her then, only for a moment. It was enough. Petra sat down again. She sat down all at once, as if her knees had chosen for her. The Duke walked across the room to the foot of the stair. Vivienne had not moved. Her hand was still on the banister. He stopped 2 paces from her, and he did not bow, but he inclined his head, and it was more than a bow. "Miss Ashcombe," he said quietly, "I came to Ashcombe to conclude a matter of business with your late father's estate. I meant to be here half a day, and gone before evening. With your permission, I should like to stay tonight. There are things I would say to you, if you will hear them. Not now. When the house is quiet." "Yes, Your Grace," she said. She did not know what else to say. He inclined his head again, and he went back to the window. Petra rose. Petra excused herself. Petra swept out of the hall with the last of her dignity gathered in her fist, and the door of her sitting room shut behind her with a small, sharp click. Vivienne sat down on the 3rd stair. She sat down because her legs would no longer hold her. She pressed her palms flat against the cool wood on either side of her, and she breathed in, and out, and in again. Outside the tall windows, the rain had turned to a soft, steady fall. The villagers had begun, slowly, to disperse. Word had reached them that all 3 children lived. Small groups of them walked back down the drive with their arms about each other's shoulders, and even at that distance Vivienne could see that many of them were weeping. The Duke stood at the window for a long time. He did not speak. She did not speak. But she was aware of him, in the way one is aware of a great tree at the edge of a field, or of a fire at the far end of a long room. Not looking at him, feeling that he was there. At length, when the light in the sky had gone from grey to a deeper, softer colour, he turned. He crossed the hall and he did not stop at the fire. He came to the foot of the stair. He looked down at her, where she still sat on the third step. "Come," he said, and held out his hand. "You have not eaten. There is soup in the small parlour. Your cook is a kind woman. She has been trying to put something warm into you for an hour and you have not noticed." She looked at his hand. She had held it once already today. She put her hand into it again, and he lifted her from the stair, and they went together, quietly, into the small parlour at the back of the house, where the fire was low and the curtains were drawn, and there was, indeed, a bowl of soup on a small round table. He did not sit with her. He stood by the fire while she ate. He did not press her to speak. When she had eaten half the bowl and could eat no more, he took the tray away himself and set it on the sideboard. Then he did sit, in the chair opposite her, and he put his elbows on his knees and looked into the fire. "May I ask you something, Miss Ashcombe?" "Yes, how did you know?" She thought about it. She thought about the tightness in her chest, and the colour of the sky, and the way the birds had gone quiet. "I did not know exactly," she said. "I felt something wrong. I have known that tree all my life. The wind was not right on it, and the birds were not singing, and the sky was the wrong colour. It was a great many small things at once. My cousin thought I was staring at the weather because I had nothing better to do. Perhaps she was correct most days. Today she was not." He nodded slowly. He looked at his own hands for a moment. They were, she saw again, ungloved. He had come into her house without his gloves, and he had not asked for them back. "When I was a boy," he said, "I nearly drowned. I was 7. I went into a pond at my father's estate, and the mud pulled my shoes down, and I could not get free. A gardener saw me from the far bank. He ran. He was old. He should not have been able to reach me in time. He did." The Duke's voice was very level. "He pulled me from the pond and set me on the grass. My father was not near. My mother was not near. When I could speak again, I asked him how he had known to look. He said he did not know. He said only that he had felt something wrong." He raised his eyes then. He looked at her across the fire. "That gardener," he said, "is now the head of my household staff at Ravensmere. He has been in my service for 23 years. I have never, in all that time, discounted the moment when a person tells me they felt something wrong. And I have never met another until today." Vivienne did not know what to say. She only knew that her eyes were suddenly hot, and that she did not want to cry in front of him. He saw it. He looked away from her at once, back into the fire, so that she might have her moment without being watched. "There is one other matter," he said after a while. "You should know it. When I came into your drive this afternoon, my carriage passed a man on the road. He was walking, on foot, in the rain, with a small dog under his coat. He was your father's old steward, Mr. Halloran, whom I understand your cousin dismissed last month over a matter of some silver spoons that were never in fact missing. He did not look at her. I have taken him on. He will be at Ravensmere by the end of the week. His dog also. I mention it only because he asked me to tell you that his rheumatism has been much better since the rain stopped the last time, and that he thinks of you kindly." Vivienne did press her hand against her mouth then. Not for long. Only for a moment. She had not known Mr. Halloran had been dismissed. She had not known he had been walking on the road. She had not known where he had gone at all. Petra had told her, when she had asked, that the old man had retired to his sister's house in Bath and was very comfortable. "Thank you," Vivienne said, when her voice would come again. "Thank you, Your Grace." He did not turn. He did not want thanks. He said, still into the fire, "It was on my way." She understood, in that moment, several things at once. She understood that he had not told her about Mr. Halloran to impress her. He had told her because he thought she should know. She understood that Petra had lied to her about the old steward, as Petra had lied to her about many things, and that the lie had been small and cruel, and no one else would ever notice it. She understood that the Duke of Ravensmere was a man who noticed exactly the small, cruel things that no one else noticed. She sat by the fire, and she said nothing more. He sat by the fire, and he said nothing more. The rain outside slackened at last to a whisper. A log settled in the grate with a soft sound. Somewhere upstairs, one of the children, safe in a warm bed, laughed in a dream. He stayed the night. He stayed the next day also, on the excuse of the business he had come to conduct. He met with Vivienne's father's old attorney in the morning. He walked, in the afternoon, up the hill to the ruined oak. He stood before it for a long time in his black coat. Vivienne watched him from the window of the drawing-room, and she did not go up to him. It seemed to her that a man ought to be allowed sometimes to stand alone before a thing that had almost taken 3 children. He came down from the hill at dusk. His boots were muddy. His hair was in his eyes. He came into the drawing-room where Vivienne was sitting with her sewing, and he stopped in the doorway. "May I sit?" "Please." He sat. He did not look at her at once. He looked at the fire. Again, she was beginning to think that the fires of her house had become his particular friends. "I have been asked by many mothers of many daughters over the years," he said, "to visit their homes. I have refused most. Those I have not refused I have found to be exactly as they were promised. Charming, well-trained, decorative, willing. I have not married any of them." He paused. "I came here because your late father did me a kindness once, when I was a young man and needed one, and I owed his estate a courtesy. I meant to sign a paper and go. I did not expect to see anything remarkable." He turned his head. He looked at her over the arm of the chair. "I have seen something remarkable, Miss Ashcombe." The room went very still. Vivienne's needle stopped. She looked at him. "Do not," he said. "Answer me now. Do not answer me tomorrow. I will not press you, but I would like, if you will allow it, to come again. I would like you to know me, as I now, in some measure, know you. And if, after some time, you find that you might wish it, I would speak to your uncle, who is, I understand, your only remaining guardian in this house." She did not answer at once. She could not have. She only sat with her sewing forgotten in her lap, and she looked at him, this large, quiet man who had come into her hall with his hair full of rain, and lifted a small, silent boy, as if the boy had been made of paper, and who had taken on an old steward and a dog because they had been walking on the road. "You may come again, Your Grace," she said. "Thank you," he said. He rose. He bowed. He went to the door. There he stopped, with his hand on the handle. He did not turn. "You are not to allow your cousin," he said quietly, "to speak to you as she did last night. Not in your own house. Not in any house. Not while I have the honor of knowing you." He did not wait for her to answer. He opened the door and went out. The house was very quiet after he had gone. Vivienne sat by the fire, and she pressed her fingertips against her cheek, where she found that the skin was hot, and she thought, for the first time in a great many years, that perhaps her small private routine of counting to 5 might not be needed as often as it had been. He came again, as he had said he would. He came a week later. He came the week after that. He came, for a season, more times than Petra could easily count, and Petra counted them all, and Petra grew, week by week, thinner and paler and more silent. She had, in her time, been very sure of her position in the manor. She had believed she had made herself indispensable through the small daily labor of managing a household. She had also believed her cousin to be plain, quiet, and easily overlooked. She had not accounted for what a duke might see in a woman who counted ceiling tiles and watched the weather. She had not accounted for a woman who could pull 3 children out from under a falling tree. The duke did not come alone. He brought, on his second visit, a boy of about Peter's age, small for his years, with quiet eyes. This was, he said, his ward, the son of a cousin lately dead. He brought on his third visit a woman who was his aunt on his mother's side a cheerful, plain woman named Mrs. Rutherford, who had a laugh like a hen's clucking and who liked Vivienne at once. He brought, on his fourth visit, no one at all. He came alone in a plain coat, and he asked if he might walk with her in the garden, and she said yes, and they walked, and they did not say very much, and it was the finest walk that Vivienne had ever taken. He did small things. He mended, without being asked, the loose latch on the gate that Vivienne's father had never been able to fix. He brought Peter a wooden top the second time he came. He asked Susanna about her mother, and he listened when she answered, and he did not try to comfort her, which was the only comfort a child in true grief can bear. He learned Tom's name, and Tom, who spoke to almost no one, spoke to him. Once, and only once, Vivienne heard, indirectly, of another kindness. It came from the housekeeper, who told her in passing that the Duke, on his fourth visit, had gone into the kitchen after supper and had spoken quietly for some time with old Mary, the scullery woman, whose son had gone for a soldier and who had had no letter for 6 months. He had asked the son's regiment. He had asked the son's name. 2 weeks later a letter had come for Mary from the son, alive and well, and stationed at a fort by the sea. The housekeeper did not know how his Grace had done it. Mary did not know. Only Vivienne, who understood by then a little of the kind of man the Duke was, understood that he had done it, and that he had done it in such a way that no one would ever be able to say, quite for certain, that he had. And then, one afternoon in late autumn, when the leaves in the west field were the colour of the coin she remembered from the morning of the storm, Petra made her mistake. There was a small gathering at the manor, not a ball. Nothing so grand. A tea, given for the neighbours at Mrs. Rutherford's cheerful insistence. The drawing-room was full. There was the smell of the good China tea and of the small cakes made with the last of the summer honey. There was the soft sound of many polite conversations. There was Vivienne, in a gown of deep green wool, standing near the window, quiet as she had always been quiet, but not, any longer, invisible. The Duke was across the room, speaking to the vicar. Petra was near the tea table. Petra had had 2 glasses of the wine that Mrs. Rutherford had thoughtfully provided, and Petra was speaking rather more loudly than was her usual habit to a Mrs. Crenshaw, who had come from the next village and did not know the family. "Oh, my cousin," Petra was saying. "Yes, of course. She is a dear thing. Very quiet. She was always the quietest child. Truly, we hardly noticed her for years. Even the servants used to walk past her in the passage without seeing her. It is only her little accident with the oak tree, you understand, that has made everyone remember she exists. Really, it is quite droll. A woman waits her whole life for a moment, and hers came in the shape of a thunderclap. She would be nothing without it. Nothing at all." The room did not exactly go silent, but a great many small conversations paused. Mrs. Crenshaw looked uncertain. The vicar's wife, standing 3 paces off, set her cup down carefully. Mrs. Rutherford, at the tea table, turned her head sharply. Vivienne heard it. She heard every word. She stood by the window with her hands folded before her, and she felt the old sting, and she counted, inside her head, to 5. 1, 2, the Duke had turned from the vicar. He was looking at her across the room. 3, 4, he was walking. He was crossing the room. He was not stopping. 5, he stopped beside her at the window. He did not look at Petra. He did not look at any of them. He looked only at Vivienne. His face was very calm. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, and he pitched his voice so that it carried, gently, to every corner of the room. He did not shout. He did not need to. "I have carried a question for a season now, which I have promised myself I would not ask until I was quite sure of the answer. I find that I am sure. I find that I have been sure for some time. If you will permit me, before this good company, I should like to ask it now." The room, which had only paused, went silent. Truly silent. Every cup in every hand stopped moving. Every head turned. The vicar's wife had her mouth a little open. Mrs. Crenshaw, who did not know the family, had gone quite pink. Petra, at the tea table, held her wine-glass in a hand that had begun, very slightly, to tremble. The Duke of Ravensmere took Vivienne's hand. He did not kneel. Not yet. He held her hand quite lightly in both of his, and he looked at her, and only at her, and Vivienne, who had spent 23 years being a woman that most rooms forgot, understood at last that she was in a room that would not, for the rest of its life, ever forget her. "Miss Vivienne Ashcombe," he said, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He knelt then, slowly, on one knee, on her mother's old carpet, in front of the tea table, in front of the vicar's wife, in front of Mrs. Crenshaw from the next village, in front of Petra, with the wine-glass shaking in her hand. Vivienne looked down at him. He was still holding her hand. His head was bent a little. She could see the small curl at the back of his hair where it had begun to dry that first afternoon by the fire. She could see the faint white line of a scar on his knuckle that she had not noticed before. She could smell the good soap he used, and beneath it the faint warm scent that was only him, and she thought, for a long slow moment in which every other person in the room seemed to have stopped breathing at once, of a little boy pulled from a pond, and of an old steward walking on a road with a small dog under his coat, and of a scullery woman with a letter from her soldier son, and of Tom, small silent Tom, whispering a first word into the shoulder of a stranger who had lifted him out of the rain. "Yes, Your Grace," she said. Her voice was quite steady. "I would." He rose. He kissed her hand. It was, in the sight of all that company, the most correct and public thing a gentleman could do, and it was also, because it was he who did it, and she who received it, the most private thing that had ever happened in that room. The room, which had been silent, made a sound. It was not a cheer. It was something softer and stranger. The sound many people make together when they have witnessed a thing they know they will speak of for the rest of their lives. Mrs. Rutherford, at the tea table, was frankly weeping. The vicar's wife had produced a small square of linen. Peter, the miller's son, who had been eating a cake by the door, dropped the cake and did not notice. Petra set her wine-glass down on the table. It rattled once against the wood. She stood very still, and her face was the colour of old parchment. The Duke turned. He did not turn to Petra. He turned to Mrs. Crenshaw, of the next village, who did not know the family. "Madam," he said, quite politely, "you have not, I believe, been rightly informed. My betrothed did not wait her whole life for a moment. She has, for as long as she has drawn breath, been a woman worth the noticing. It is not she who was made by the storm. It was the storm that had the great good fortune 3 months ago to be witnessed by her." Mrs. Crenshaw did not know what to say. Mrs. Crenshaw curtsied. It was a good curtsy. The Duke inclined his head. He did not look at Petra at all. He did not need to. The room had heard him. The room would remember. Petra left the drawing-room very quietly, some minutes later. She left the manor within the week. She went in the end to a great-aunt in the north, who was very old and very rich and very deaf, and who paid Petra a small allowance to read to her from the newspapers in the afternoons. Petra spent many years in that great-aunt's house. She was, by all accounts, very quiet there, and no one at Ashcombe heard from her often, and it was, in its own quiet way, a fair enough justice. They were married in the spring, in the small church at the foot of the hill. The 3 children stood at the front. Tom held Susanna's hand. Peter carried the ring on a small blue cushion, and he did not drop it. Miss Halloran, the old steward, stood in the second pew, with his small dog at his feet, and old Mary, the scullery woman, stood at his shoulder, dressed in her Sunday best, weeping quite openly, and not caring who saw. Mrs. Rutherford wept too, in a manner much like a hen's clucking. The Duke's ward, the quiet boy, stood at his uncle's shoulder as the best man, and looked up at him from time to time with a small private pride. Vivienne wore her mother's veil. She walked down the aisle on the arm of her uncle, who was a shy man and pleased to be needed. She did not look at the pews as she walked. She looked at the man at the end of the aisle, in his dark coat, with his hair curling a little at the ends from the damp of the morning. And she felt no fear at all. Afterwards they went, the whole party, up the west field to the top of the hill. The Duke had, some weeks before, ordered a young oak brought from his own estate, and it stood now in a hole freshly dug where the great tree had been. It was a slender thing. It was no taller than Vivienne herself. Its leaves were bright as new pennies. Tom, small Tom, who spoke now, though not often, was given the honor of setting the first spadeful of earth against the young trunk. He did it very carefully, with a small, serious face. Susanna set the second. Peter set the third. Vivienne set the fourth. The Duke set the fifth, and pressed the earth flat with the palm of his hand, and did not brush the earth off after. They stood for a while, all of them, on the top of the hill in the spring wind. The air smelled of new grass, and of the sea, and, faintly, still, if one knew what to look for, of an old, deep, dark thing at the heart of the earth that had once been struck by lightning. Vivienne stood beside her husband. She was aware of him, in the way one is aware of a great tree at the edge of a field. He looked down at her. "It will be a long time," he said, "before this one is as tall as the one that fell." "Yes," she said, "we shall not see it grow to full height." "No, but it will grow," he said. "It will grow, and other children will play beneath it, and one day someone standing on the drive will look up at this hill and see a tree that has always been there." She looked up at him. She smiled a very small smile, and she reached out her hand and slipped it through the crook of his arm. "Yes," she said, "that is quite enough." They walked down the hill together, in the soft light, and behind them the young oak stood in the wind. The parish, in the years after, would come to speak of two things when they spoke of Ashcombe Manor. They would speak of the day the lightning struck the old oak, and the woman who had pulled the children clear seconds before it fell. And they would speak of the marriage that had come out of that day, which many said was the truest and quietest marriage the county had ever seen. They were both, in their way, storm and shelter, and the little tree on the hill grew, year by year, into the space that the old one had left, and in time no one who had not been there could remember which oak was which. Some things fall, the old people of the village would say, so that other things may be planted, and some women, once seen, are seen forever after.